Thomas Mitchell had served the British royal family for 15 years. His tall frame and sharp eyes made him perfect for his job as a royal guard. He had protected kings, queens, and princes through countless events. But nothing prepared him for what happened on that cold Tuesday morning in November. Queen Camilla walked through the corridors of Buckingham Palace with her usual confident stride. Thomas stood at his post near the main entrance, watching as palace staff hurried past, with their daily duties. The morning seemed normal until the Queen stopped directly in front of him. "Mitchell," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hallway. "I need to speak with you privately." Thomas felt his heart skip. In all his years of service, the Queen had never addressed him directly. He followed her into a small sitting room decorated with ancient paintings and heavy curtains. The room felt cold despite the fireplace crackling in the corner. "Your services are no longer required," Queen Camilla announced without any explanation. "You will leave the palace immediately. Your replacement has already been arranged." Thomas stared at her in shock. He had received excellent reviews in all his evaluations. There had been no complaints about his work. His mind raced, trying to understand what had gone wrong. "Ma'am, may I ask why?" Thomas managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The Queen's expression remained stern. "That information is not necessary for you to know. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." Within an hour, Thomas found himself standing outside the palace gates with a small box of his possessions. 15 years of loyal service had ended in minutes. The other guards avoided eye contact as he walked past them. It felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Back in his small London apartment, Thomas sat in silence. The dismissal made no sense. He replayed every recent event in his mind, searching for clues. Then he remembered something that had been bothering him for weeks. 3 weeks earlier, he had been assigned to night duty in the palace archives. It was unusual because archive security was typically handled by different personnel. During his patrol, he heard voices coming from a restricted section that housed historical documents. Through a slightly open door, he saw Queen Camilla speaking quietly with 2 men in expensive suits. They were examining old files and photographs. Thomas couldn't hear most of their conversation, but he caught fragments of sentences that made his blood run cold. "The investigation must never be reopened," one man had said. "Too many people still ask questions about that night," Queen Camilla replied. "The official story will remain the official story," the other man added. Thomas had quickly moved away, pretending he hadn't heard anything. But those words kept echoing in his mind. What investigation? What night were they talking about? And why was the Queen involved in keeping something secret? Now, sitting in his apartment after being dismissed so abruptly, Thomas began to connect the dots. The timing of his dismissal seemed too convenient. Had someone noticed that he overheard that conversation? Was he removed because he knew something he shouldn't? He turned on his television and watched the news. The reporter was discussing upcoming events for the royal family. As images of the palace flashed on screen, Thomas felt a mix of anger and determination growing inside him. For 15 years, he had kept every royal secret. He had been loyal, discreet, and professional. But his sudden dismissal without explanation felt like betrayal. If they could throw away his career so easily, maybe it was time to question his loyalty. Thomas walked to his desk and pulled out a pen and paper. He began writing down everything he could remember about that night in the archives. Every word, every gesture, every detail that seemed important. He didn't know what it all meant yet, but he was determined to find out. The next morning, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had memorized years ago. It belonged to a journalist named Sarah Collins, someone who specialized in stories about the royal family. "Sarah, this is Thomas Mitchell. I used to work at the palace," he said when she answered. "I think we need to meet. I have something important to tell you about Princess Diana." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Sarah spoke, her voice filled with curiosity and excitement. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been waiting for a call like this for 26 years. Sarah Collins arrived at the small cafe in East London wearing dark sunglasses and a plain coat. Thomas recognized her immediately from her television appearances, though she looked different without the professional makeup and bright studio lighting. She chose a corner table away from other customers and ordered black coffee. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Thomas said as he sat across from her. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his teacup. Sarah studied his face carefully. She had interviewed many people over the years who claimed to have inside information about the royal family. Most were attention seekers or mentally unstable individuals. But Thomas seemed different. His nervousness appeared genuine, and his story about being dismissed was easy to verify. "Tell me about Princess Diana," Sarah said quietly. Thomas took a deep breath. "I wasn't working at the palace when she died in 1997. I started my job 2 years later. But over the years I heard things, small comments from older staff members, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms." He paused and looked around the cafe to make sure no one was listening. The older guards used to talk about how strange everything was after Diana's death, how certain evidence disappeared, how some witnesses changed their stories, how specific people were transferred or retired suddenly. Sarah leaned forward. She had investigated Diana's death for years and knew about the inconsistencies in the official reports. But she needed more than rumors and secondhand information. "What about the conversation you overheard? The one in the archives?" Thomas described that night in detail. The restricted files, the quiet voices, Queen Camilla's words, about keeping investigations closed. As he spoke, Sarah took careful notes in a small notebook hidden under the table. "Did you see which files they were looking at?" she asked. "I couldn't get close enough without being noticed, but I saw photographs scattered on the table, black and white photos that looked old, and there was a red folder with official seals on it." Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew about red folders from her sources inside various government departments. They typically contained classified information that was meant to stay buried forever. "Thomas, I need you to understand something," Sarah said seriously. "If what you're telling me is true, this is bigger than just losing your job. People have disappeared for knowing less about Diana's death." Thomas nodded grimly. "I've thought about that, but I can't pretend I didn't hear what I heard. Diana deserves the truth to come out." Sarah had been investigating Diana's death since 1997. She had interviewed crash witnesses, emergency responders, and hotel staff from Paris. She had studied every official report and found dozens of contradictions. But she had never found someone with direct access to current royal conversations about covering up information. "I have a contact at the palace," Sarah said carefully. "Someone who might be able to help us identify those files you saw. But I need more details about the room, the time, anything that might help locate those documents." Thomas closed his eyes and tried to remember every detail. The archive room was on the second floor, east wing. There was a painting of King George III on the wall. The filing cabinets were dark wood, very old. The conversation happened around midnight on a Thursday. Sarah wrote everything down. Her contact was a cleaning staff member who had worked at the palace for 30 years. She had access to many areas and had been providing Sarah with small pieces of information for years. "There's something else," Thomas said hesitantly. "After I was dismissed, I did some research on my own. I looked up the employment records of other guards who worked there in 1997 and 1998. What did you find? 7 guards who were on duty during the weeks after Diana's death were all transferred or dismissed within 6 months. All of them. That's not normal turnover." Sarah felt chills run down her spine. She had suspected for years that there was an organized effort to remove people who might have seen or heard something important. But she had never been able to prove it. "I tried to contact some of these former guards," Thomas continued. 3 of them refused to speak to me at all. One hung up immediately when I mentioned Diana's name, but one agreed to meet with me." "Who?" "James Crawford. He was a senior guard in 1997. He told me things that will shock you." Sarah's notebook was filling up quickly. Every piece of information Thomas provided seemed to connect with things she had discovered during her years of investigation. James said there were phone calls coming into the palace all night after the crash was announced. Not normal calls from press or officials, calls in foreign languages, calls that were immediately transferred to private lines. He said the atmosphere in the palace was strange, like everyone was waiting for something else to happen. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. James also gave me this. He kept it all these years because he knew it might be important someday. Sarah unfolded the paper carefully. It was a handwritten note with a list of names and phone numbers. At the top, someone had written, Paris Contact List, August 1997, in blue ink. Sarah recognized two of the names immediately. They belonged to French intelligence officers who had been connected to various cover-up operations over the years. Her hands shook as she photographed the document with her phone. "Thomas, this changes everything," she whispered. "This is evidence of direct communication between the palace and French intelligence during the time of Diana's death." Thomas looked pale but determined. "What do we do now?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. They were entering dangerous territory, but the truth about Diana's death was finally within reach. "We go to Paris," she said, "and we start asking the right people the right questions." The train from London to Paris felt longer than usual to Thomas. He stared out the window at the countryside rushing past, wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Sarah sat across from him, studying photographs and documents. She had brought in a secure briefcase. "The first person we need to meet is Henri Dubois," Sarah explained quietly. "He was a photographer for French tabloids in 1997. He was in the tunnel within minutes of the crash, but his photos were confiscated by police and never returned." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "Will he talk to us?" "He's been wanting to talk for 26 years. But he's been too afraid. Maybe now, with what you overheard at the palace, he'll feel safe enough to speak." They arrived in Paris on a gray afternoon. The city looked the same as Thomas remembered from his only previous visit, but everything felt different now. Every face in the crowd seemed suspicious. Every car that followed them for more than a block made him nervous. Sarah led him through narrow streets to a small apartment building in Montmartre. They climbed 3 flights of stairs and knocked on a door marked with a brass number 7. Henri Dubois answered the door slowly. He was a thin man in his 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes. When he saw Sarah, he smiled slightly and invited them inside. The apartment was cluttered with photography equipment and stacks of newspapers from different decades. The walls were covered with photographs Henri had taken over his career, but Thomas noticed there were no pictures from 1997. "I have been waiting for someone like you," Henri said to Thomas in accented English. "Someone from inside the palace, who finally wants the truth to come out." Henri made coffee and sat down in an old leather chair. His hands shook slightly as he began to speak. "I was following Diana's car that night, but not too closely. Many photographers were chasing them, but I stayed back because I knew dangerous driving when I saw it. When I heard the crash, I was maybe 2 minutes behind them." Thomas and Sarah listened carefully as Henri described arriving at the tunnel. The scene was chaotic, with emergency vehicles arriving and people running in different directions. But what was strange, Henri continued, was how quickly certain people appeared who were not emergency workers. Men in dark suits who seemed to be looking for something specific in the wreckage. "What kind of something?" Sarah asked. "They were checking the car very carefully. Not like they were looking for survivors. Like they were looking for objects, small objects. One man had a metal detector." Thomas felt chills as he remembered the conversation he had overheard at the palace. Someone had mentioned making sure certain evidence disappeared. Henri stood up and walked to an old desk in the corner of the room. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. "I took many pictures that night before police took my cameras. But I had a backup camera hidden in my jacket. These photos have never been seen by anyone except me." He spread several black and white photographs on the table. Thomas studied them carefully. Most showed the crashed Mercedes from different angles, emergency workers and crowds of onlookers. But one photograph made Thomas's heart race. It showed 2 men in expensive suits standing near the car wreckage. They were holding what appeared to be electronic devices and seemed to be having an intense conversation. "Do you know who these men are?" Thomas asked. Henri nodded grimly. "The tall one is Marcus Webb, British intelligence. The shorter one is Claude Moreau, French security services. Neither of them should have been at that crash scene. Sarah took careful photographs of Henri's pictures with her phone. This was the first visual evidence she had seen that suggested intelligence agencies were involved in the immediate aftermath of Diana's crash. "There's more," Henri said quietly. "I followed these men after they left the tunnel. They went to a hotel near the Champs-Élysées and met with other people, important-looking people." He showed them another photograph taken from across the street. It was grainy, but it clearly showed the same two men entering the Hotel de Crillon with a woman in dark clothing. I couldn't see the woman's face clearly, but she was definitely British. Her clothes, her posture, the way she carried herself, someone important. Thomas studied the photograph intensely. Something about the woman seemed familiar, but he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Henri, did you ever try to publish these photographs?" Sarah asked. Henri laughed bitterly. "I tried for years. Every newspaper, every magazine, every news organization I contacted suddenly lost interest after I showed them the photos. Some editors told me directly that they had received warnings not to pursue the story." "Warnings from whom?" "They never said specifically. But the message was always clear. Publish these photos and bad things will happen to your career, your family, or your health." Thomas understood now why his dismissal had happened so quickly. The people involved in covering up Diana's death were still active, still protecting their secrets, still eliminating threats. Sarah carefully put Henri's photographs back in their envelope. "Henri, we need to take these photos to experts who can enhance them and identify more people. Will you let us do that?" Henri hesitated. "For 26 years I have kept these photos safe. They are the only evidence that certain people were at that crash scene when they shouldn't have been there." "I understand your fear," Thomas said, "but I just lost my career for accidentally overhearing a conversation about keeping Diana's case closed. If we don't act now, the truth might stay buried forever." Henri looked at both of them for a long moment. Then he handed Sarah the envelope. "Take them," he said, "but be very careful. The people in those photographs have killed to protect their secrets before. They will not hesitate to kill again." As they left Henri's apartment, Thomas felt the weight of what they were carrying. They now had physical evidence that intelligence agents were present at Diana's crash scene, evidence of ongoing cover-up conversations at the palace, and a list of contact numbers connecting London to Paris. But they also had something else, a target on their backs that was getting bigger by the hour. "Where do we go from here?" Thomas asked as they walked through the darkening Paris streets. Sarah checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from an unknown number. "We go underground," she said, "because I think they already know we're here." Sarah led Thomas through a maze of small streets in the Latin Quarter. They had been walking for 20 minutes, doubling back several times to make sure they weren't being followed. Thomas's training as a security guard helped him notice the signs. The same man in a blue jacket who appeared 3 different times, the woman with the red scarf who seemed to be talking into her phone while watching them. "In here," Sarah whispered, pulling Thomas into a small internet cafe filled with young students and tourists. They chose computers in the back corner, and Sarah immediately began uploading Henri's photographs to a secure server. While the files transferred, she made several encrypted phone calls to contacts around the world. "I'm sending the photos to 3 different experts," she explained to Thomas. "One in Germany who specializes in facial recognition, one in Canada who can enhance image quality, and one in Australia who works with forensic photography." Thomas watched nervously as people came and went from the cafe. Every new face made him wonder if they were being watched. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told you yet," he said quietly. "After I was dismissed from the palace, I went back to my apartment and found signs that someone had been inside. Nothing was stolen, but things were moved slightly. My computer had been accessed." Sarah stopped typing and looked at him seriously. "Why didn't you mention this before?" "I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid. But now, after seeing how scared Henri was, I think someone is monitoring everything I do." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly and her face went pale. "We need to leave. Now." They abandoned their computers and walked quickly toward the exit. As they reached the door, Thomas saw the man in the blue jacket standing across the street, speaking into a phone and looking directly at them. "This way," Sarah said, turning left instead of right. They hurried through narrow alleyways, past small shops and restaurants. Sarah seemed to know exactly where she was going, leading Thomas through shortcuts and hidden passages he never would have found on his own. "I have a safe house," she explained as they climbed a steep set of stone steps, a place where other journalists stay when they're working on dangerous stories. The safe house turned out to be a small apartment above a bookstore owned by an elderly woman named Marie Leclerc. Marie had been helping journalists and activists for 40 years, providing secure locations for meetings and document storage. "Ah, Sarah," Marie said as she opened the door. "I have been expecting you. The usual room is ready." The room was simple, but secure, with thick walls, no windows facing the street, and equipment for detecting electronic surveillance. Sarah immediately began sweeping the room for listening devices while Thomas collapsed into a chair, exhausted from the stress of the day. "Thomas, I need to tell you something important," Sarah said after confirming the room was clean. "My contact at Buckingham Palace sent me a message while we were at the cafe. Queen Camilla held an emergency meeting this morning with several high-ranking officials." "About what?" "About you, and about me. They know we've been meeting. They know we went to Paris, and they know we spoke with Henri." Thomas felt his blood run cold. How could they possibly know all that so quickly? Sarah sat down across from him. "Because someone has been watching both of us for weeks, maybe months. Your dismissal wasn't sudden, it was planned. They were waiting for you to do exactly what you've done." "You mean this is all a trap?" "Not exactly a trap, but definitely a test. They wanted to see how much you actually knew and who you would contact. By dismissing you abruptly, they forced you to seek answers elsewhere." Thomas tried to process this information. His entire world had been turned upside down in just a few days, and now he was learning that even his rebellion against the system had been anticipated. But why would they let us get this far? Why not just stop us before we found Henri and the photographs? Sarah smiled grimly. "Because they want to know what evidence exists against them. By following us, they're learning about witnesses they didn't know about, documents they hadn't found, and connections they hadn't considered." Marie knocked on the door and entered with tea and sandwiches. She also carried a thick envelope marked with Sarah's name. "This arrived by special courier 1 hour ago," Marie said. Sarah opened the envelope carefully. Inside were enhanced versions of Henri's photographs, along with detailed analysis reports from her expert contacts. The improvements in image quality were remarkable. "Look at this," Sarah said, spreading the enhanced photos on the table. In the clearest image, the woman entering the Hotel de Crillon was now clearly visible. Thomas stared at the photograph in shock. "That's Lady Patricia Worthington," he said. "She was Queen Elizabeth's private secretary in 1997. She's still alive, living in retirement in Scotland." Sarah felt excitement building. Lady Patricia would have been one of the few people with direct access to all communications between the palace and government agencies during the Diana crisis. "If we can get her to talk," Sarah began. "She'll never talk," Thomas interrupted. "People like her don't break their silence. They take secrets to their graves." But Sarah was already making plans. "Maybe she won't talk to us directly, but there might be another way to get information from her." She showed Thomas one of the enhanced photographs that revealed something new. A briefcase in Lady Patricia's hand had a visible airline luggage tag. "If we can find out what flight she took that night, we can trace her movements. Airlines keep detailed passenger records even from 1997. Marie, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "I may be able to help with that. I have a friend who worked for Air France during those years. He has access to old flight manifests." Thomas looked around the small room at these two women who were risking their lives to uncover the truth about Diana. He thought about his quiet life as a palace guard, following orders and keeping secrets. Now he was part of something much bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "What happens if we actually find proof that Diana was murdered?" he asked. Sarah and Marie exchanged glances. They had both seen what happened to people who Got too close to this particular truth. Then we publish everything at once in multiple countries before they can stop us, Sarah said. But first, we need to stay alive long enough to find that proof. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Come home, Thomas. All is forgiven. Continue this path, and you will not be forgiven. He showed the message to Sarah and Marie. All three of them understood what it meant. They're offering you one last chance to walk away, Sarah said. Thomas deleted the message and turned off his phone. Then we better work fast, he said, because I'm not walking away. Marie's friend Philippe arrived at the safe house before dawn. He was a nervous man in his 70s who kept checking the street through the curtains. In his hands was a leather portfolio containing flight records from August and September 1997. I could go to prison for this, Philippe whispered as he sat down at the small table. These records are supposed to be destroyed after 25 years, but I kept copies of unusual flights during that time period. Sarah poured coffee for everyone while Philippe opened his portfolio. The records were handwritten logs of private flights and last-minute bookings that had seemed suspicious at the time. Here, Philippe said, pointing to an entry dated August 31, 1997. Private charter flight from London to Paris, departed 11:47 p.m. 3 passengers, no names recorded, paid in cash. Thomas studied the entry. The timing was significant. Diana's crash had been reported around 12:30 a.m. Paris time. A private flight leaving London just before midnight would have arrived in Paris around the time Henri photographed Lady Patricia at the hotel. Do you have any other details about this flight? Sarah asked. Philippe flipped through more pages. The plane was registered to a company called European Security Services. I checked. That company doesn't exist anymore. It was dissolved in 1998. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. A fake company, a mysterious flight, cash payments, and no passenger names. This had all the hallmarks of an intelligence operation. Philippe, you said there were 3 passengers. Do you have any descriptions? My friend who handled the flight said 2 were men in expensive suits, English accents. The third was a woman, very official looking, also English. She seemed to be in charge. Thomas and Sarah exchanged glances. The description matched Lady Patricia perfectly. Marie, who had been quiet until now, suddenly looked up from some papers she was reading. I found something else. My contact at the French National Archives discovered this yesterday. She handed them a photocopy of an official document with multiple stamps and signatures. It was a temporary residence permit issued on September 1st, 1997, for P. Worthington, British diplomatic staff. Lady Patricia stayed in Paris for 3 days after Diana's death, Sarah said, reading the document carefully. But according to official palace schedules, she was supposed to be in London, handling press statements and funeral preparations. Thomas felt the weight of what they were discovering. So she was secretly in Paris for 3 days while telling everyone she was in London. What was she doing here? Sarah was already making phone calls to her contacts in French government offices. After 20 minutes of hushed conversations, she had an answer that made everyone in the room fall silent. Lady Patricia met with the French Interior Minister, the head of French intelligence, and the British ambassador during those 3 days. All of those meetings were kept off official records. Philippe gathered his flight records and prepared to leave. I have given you everything I can. Now I must disappear for a while. People who help with Diana investigations have a habit of having accidents. After Philippe left, Thomas, Sarah, and Marie sat in the small room surrounded by photographs, documents, and notes. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was also circumstantial. They had proof of secret meetings, mysterious flights, and cover-up conversations, but no direct evidence of murder. We need someone to confess, Sarah said finally. Someone who was directly involved and is willing to tell the truth. Thomas had an idea that frightened him even as he suggested it. What if we approach Queen Camilla directly? What if we show her everything we've found and give her a chance to explain? Sarah stared at him. Thomas, that's suicide. The moment we contact her, we'll disappear. Maybe. Or maybe she'll realize that the truth is going to come out anyway and decide to control the narrative herself. Marie had been listening to their conversation while reading through more documents. Suddenly, she looked up with excitement. There is someone else who might talk, someone I haven't thought of in years. She explained that during her decades of helping journalists, she had occasionally provided shelter for a British woman named Dr. Rebecca Hayes. Rebecca had worked as a trauma surgeon in Paris hospitals during the 1990s and had been on duty the night Diana was brought to the hospital. Rebecca left France suddenly in 1998 and never returned. She was traumatized by something that happened that night, but she never told me exactly what. Sarah felt hope rising. A doctor who had treated Diana would have first-hand knowledge of her injuries and could potentially confirm or deny whether the crash could have been survivable. "Do you know where Rebecca is now?" Thomas asked. Marie nodded. "She moved to New Zealand and became a family doctor in a small town. She's been hiding there for 26 years, but we still exchange Christmas cards." Sarah was already planning their next move. "We need to go to New Zealand. If Rebecca will talk to us, she could provide the medical evidence that proves Diana's death wasn't an accident." Thomas thought about the threatening text message he had received. Going to New Zealand would mean leaving Europe entirely, making it harder for their enemies to track them, but also cutting them off from their sources of help. "What if this is all part of their plan?" he asked. "What if they want us to go to New Zealand so they can eliminate us somewhere remote where no one will find our bodies?" Sarah had considered the same possibility. "It's a risk. But Rebecca Hayes is the only person still alive who was in that hospital room with Diana. If she saw something that proves Diana was murdered, it's worth the risk." Marie was already booking flights on her secure computer. "I have contacts in Auckland who can provide you with safe accommodation, but you must promise me something. If you get the evidence you need, you'll publish it immediately. Don't try to negotiate with these people or give them chances to explain. They've had 26 years to tell the truth." Thomas looked at the evidence spread across the table. Photographs of intelligence agents at the crash scene, records of secret flights, documentation of cover-up meetings, and proof of ongoing efforts to keep the investigation closed. "We've come too far to stop now," he said. "If Dr. Hayes can tell us what really happened in that hospital, then we'll finally have the complete story." Sarah closed her laptop and gathered the most important documents into a waterproof bag. "Then we're going to New Zealand, but first, we're going to send copies of everything we've found to journalists in 12 different countries. If something happens to us, the story will still come out." As they prepared to leave the safe house, Thomas realized his old life was completely gone. He would never return to his quiet job as a royal guard. He was now a fugitive from some of the most powerful people in the world. But for the first time since his dismissal, he felt like his life had real purpose. Princess Diana had been silenced, but her story was finally going to be told. The small town of Waipu in New Zealand seemed like the end of the world to Thomas. After 36 hours of travel through multiple airports and several false identities provided by Marie's network, he and Sarah finally stood outside a modest medical clinic surrounded by rolling green hills and sheep pastures. Dr. Rebecca Hayes looked older than her 62 years. When she opened the clinic door and saw Sarah holding a photograph of Lady Patricia Worthington, her face went completely white. "I wondered when this day would come," Rebecca said quietly. "Come inside quickly before anyone sees you." The clinic was empty. Rebecca had canceled all her appointments after receiving Sarah's coded message the day before. She led them to her private office and immediately closed all the blinds. "You shouldn't have come here," Rebecca said, her hands shaking as she poured tea. "I've spent 26 years building a new life, trying to forget what I saw that night." Thomas studied her face. This woman was clearly traumatized, but she also seemed relieved that someone had finally come asking the right questions. "Dr. Hayes, we know about the secret flights, the cover-up meetings, and the people who were at the crash scene who shouldn't have been there," Sarah said gently. "But we need to know what happened in the hospital. You're the only person who can tell us the medical truth about Diana's death." Rebecca walked to her desk and pulled out a key. She used it to open a locked filing cabinet and removed a thick folder marked "Personal Documents, Private." "I've kept my notes from that night for 26 years, she said. "I knew someday I would need to tell someone the truth." She spread several pages of handwritten medical notes on her desk. Thomas could see they were detailed records of Diana's condition, treatment, and the people who were present in the hospital. Princess Diana was brought to our trauma unit at 2:06 a.m., Rebecca began. Her injuries were severe but absolutely survivable. She had internal bleeding and chest trauma, but nothing that should have been fatal with proper treatment. Sarah took careful notes as Rebecca continued. We immediately began emergency procedures. Diana was conscious when she arrived. She spoke to me directly. Thomas felt chills as he realized what Rebecca was about to reveal. What did she say? Rebecca looked at her notes, though she clearly remembered every word without reading them. She said, "They tried to kill me. Don't let them finish the job." The room fell silent. After 26 years, they finally had Diana's own words about what happened to her. I started IV lines and began treating her internal bleeding. Rebecca continued. Her vital signs were stabilizing. She was responding well to treatment. At 2:45 a.m., I was confident she was going to survive. What changed? Sarah asked. Rebecca's voice became very quiet. At 3:15 a.m., 2 men in suits arrived at the hospital. They said they were from the British Embassy and needed to speak with Diana privately. Hospital security let them into the trauma unit. Thomas and Sarah exchanged shocked glances. The men in suits matched the description of the intelligence agents Henri had photographed at the crash scene. I was ordered to leave the room while they spoke with Diana, Rebecca continued, but I could hear raised voices through the door. Diana was arguing with them, saying she wouldn't keep quiet about something. Rebecca showed them another page of notes with timestamps documenting exactly what happened next. At 3:32 a.m., one of the men called me back into the room. He said Diana had taken a turn for the worse and needed immediate surgery. But when I examined her, her condition hadn't changed. If anything, she seemed stronger than before. Sarah's pen moved quickly across her notebook. This was the evidence they had been searching for, proof that Diana's death wasn't the result of her crash injuries. The men insisted that Diana be moved to a different room for surgery. They said it was for security reasons. Against my medical judgment, I was forced to comply. Rebecca pulled out a hospital floor plan from 1997 and pointed to 2 different areas. Diana should have gone to operating room A, which had all the equipment needed for her type of injuries. Instead, the men directed us to take her to a smaller room in the basement that was normally used for minor procedures. Thomas felt sick as he realized what they were hearing. What happened in the basement room? Rebecca's voice broke as she answered. I was told to wait outside while they prepared her for surgery. I waited for 45 minutes. When they finally let me back in, Diana was unconscious, and her vital signs were failing rapidly. She showed them medical charts documenting the sudden change in Diana's condition. Someone had given her an injection that wasn't in her medical orders. When I asked what it was, one of the men said it was pain medication approved by London doctors. But the injection site showed signs of something much more serious. Sarah looked up from her notes. What kind of injection? Based on Diana's symptoms and the rapid deterioration of her condition, I believe she was given a massive dose of insulin or another drug that would cause cardiac arrest. It was made to look like her body was giving up from crash injuries, but the timing and symptoms were all wrong. Rebecca showed them her final notes from that night, written in shaky handwriting. At 4:53 a.m., Princess Diana went into cardiac arrest. We attempted resuscitation for 27 minutes, but she had been given too much of whatever drug they used. She was pronounced dead at 5:20 a.m. Thomas stared at the medical records in horror. They had proof that Diana had been murdered, but it had taken 26 years to find it. Dr. Hayes, why didn't you report this immediately? Rebecca laughed bitterly. I tried. I wrote a detailed report about the suspicious circumstances and gave it to the hospital administrator. The next day I was told that my report had been lost and that I was being transferred to a different hospital immediately. She pulled out newspaper clippings from 1998, showing reports of several unexplained deaths of medical personnel who had been involved in Diana's treatment. 3 other doctors and 2 nurses who worked on Diana that night died within 6 months. Car accidents, heart attacks, suicides, all perfectly explainable individually, but suspicious as a pattern. Sarah felt the weight of 26 years of cover-up and murder. Is that why you left France? I received a visit from the same 2 men who had been in the hospital that night. They explained very politely that I had a choice: move far away and never speak about what I saw, or have a fatal accident like my colleagues. Rebecca walked to her window and looked out at the peaceful New Zealand countryside. I chose to live. I've regretted that choice every day for 26 years, but now that you're here, maybe Diana can finally get justice. Thomas and Sarah spent the next 2 hours going through every detail of Rebecca's evidence. They photographed her medical notes, copied her hospital records, and recorded her complete testimony on video. "Dr. Hayes, we're going to publish this story," Sarah said as they prepared to leave. "Are you prepared for what will happen when the world learns the truth?" Rebecca nodded firmly. "I'm 62 years old and I've been carrying this secret for half my life. I'm ready to face whatever consequences come from telling the truth." As they left the clinic, Thomas felt both triumph and terror. They finally had definitive proof that Princess Diana had been murdered by British intelligence agents. But they also knew that the people responsible for her death were still powerful enough to kill anyone who threatened to expose them. "We need to get this story published in every major newspaper simultaneously," Sarah said as they drove toward Auckland Airport. "If we release it gradually, they'll find ways to discredit or suppress it." Thomas checked his phone and saw 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. "I think they already know we found Rebecca," he said. Sarah pressed harder on the accelerator. "Then we better reach that airport before they reach us." Behind them, a black sedan had been following at a distance for the past 10 minutes. As they approached the main highway to Auckland, 2 more black vehicles appeared from side roads, boxing them in from multiple directions. Thomas looked at the evidence they were carrying: photographs, documents, medical records, and video testimony that would finally reveal the truth about Princess Diana's murder. "Sarah, if we don't make it—" "We will make it," she said firmly. "Diana waited 26 years for justice. We're not going to let her down now." The black sedans were getting closer, but Auckland Airport was just visible on the horizon. The IDTIR race to expose the truth about Princess Diana's death was entering its final, most dangerous phase.